The awakening terror, the silent harvest. The agricultural domes of Viridian 7 stretched across the planet's northern hemisphere like transparent pearls scattered on rust-colored sand. Inside these climate-controlled sanctuaries, crops from a dozen different worlds grew in perfect harmony. The colony had been established 70 years ago by the Botanical Consortium, a coalition of species dedicated to feeding the growing populations of the inner systems. Supervisor Krell checked his monitoring station for the third time that morning. Everything showed normal. Temperature stable, humidity optimal. The grain fields were 2 weeks from harvest, and the projections indicated a record yield. His secondary arms tapped rhythmically on the console as he hummed an old Tarkelian work song. "Krell, are you seeing this?" The voice of his assistant, Mira, crackled through the comm system. She was stationed in the eastern domes nearly 40 kilometers away. Seeing what? Krell adjusted his visual spectrum, scanning the agricultural readouts. The sensors. They're picking up something in high orbit. Multiple contacts, but they're not broadcasting any identification codes. Krell felt his primary heart rate increase. Viridian 7 was a peaceful colony, far from any contested territories. They rarely saw anything larger than automated cargo haulers. "Have you contacted orbital control?" "I'm trying. The comm channels are experiencing interference." Mira's voice carried an edge of worry that Krell had never heard before. "Wait, the contacts are moving. They're descending toward the surface." Krell pulled up the orbital scan data on his main screen. What he saw made his blood run cold. 17 objects, each massive in scale, were dropping through the atmosphere at impossible speeds. Their profiles didn't match any ship design in the Galactic Registry. They looked organic, like enormous seeds with surfaces that rippled and pulsed. "Sound the evacuation alarm," Krell ordered, his voice steady despite the fear gripping his chest. "Get everyone to the underground shelters." The first object struck the western agricultural zone 3 minutes later. There was no explosion, no fire, no dramatic destruction. Instead, the ship simply settled onto the surface like a living thing taking root. Its hull opened in 1,000 places simultaneously, releasing a flood of smaller organisms that moved with purpose and terrible coordination. Krell watched through the security feeds as the creatures spread across the dome fields. They were roughly humanoid in shape, but constructed from materials that seemed to shift between metal and flesh. Their movements were fluid yet mechanical, and they worked with an efficiency that spoke of perfect coordination. "They're not attacking the people," Mira reported, her voice shaking. "They're going for the infrastructure. The power stations, the water processors, the environmental controls." Within 10 minutes, the western domes went dark. The temperature control systems failed, and the carefully maintained atmosphere began to dissipate into Viridian 7's toxic natural environment. Krell could see colonists running, trying to reach the shelters, but the creatures were everywhere. Then something worse happened. The creatures began to touch the structures themselves, and where they made contact, the metal and composite materials started to dissolve. It wasn't destruction in any conventional sense. The buildings, the equipment, even the crops were being absorbed, flowing into the creatures like liquid being drawn through a membrane. "Get to the emergency pods," Krell transmitted to all stations. "Forget the shelters. We need to evacuate the planet, now." He ran through the corridor toward the launch bay, his 4 legs carrying him faster than he had ever moved in his life. Behind him, he could hear the structural supports of the dome beginning to fail as they were consumed by the invaders. Other colonists joined him in the mad dash for survival, a mix of species all united in their terror. The launch bay doors were sealed when Krell arrived. Through the transparent aluminum windows, he could see why. The creatures had already reached this section. They were methodically dismantling the escape pods from the outside, absorbing the materials into their biomechanical forms. Krell activated his personal comm unit one final time. "This is Supervisor Krell of Viridian 7. We are under attack by unknown hostiles. They are not destroying the colony. They are consuming it. Everything, the structures, the technology, even the organic matter. If anyone receives this message, do not attempt a rescue. Do not approach this system. They are..." The window in front of him darkened as one of the creatures pressed itself against the transparent surface. Up close, Krell could see the terrible complexity of its form. Circuits woven through muscle tissue. Neural pathways running alongside mechanical conduits. Eyes that held an intelligence both vast and utterly alien. The creature placed what might have been a hand against the window, and the material began to dissolve. Krell backed away, but there was nowhere to go. The last thing he transmitted was a scream that cut off abruptly as the creature touched him, and he felt himself beginning to change, to be incorporated into something vast and hungry and unstoppable. 3 days later, a galactic patrol vessel arrived at Viridian 7 to investigate the lost communications. They found a planet stripped bare of all technology, all structures, all signs of habitation. The agricultural domes were gone. The orbital stations had vanished. Even the automated defense satellites had disappeared without a trace. The only thing left was a single message beacon floating in high orbit, broadcasting Krell's final transmission on an endless loop. The patrol captain listened to it once, then immediately opened a priority channel to Galactic Command. "Sir, we have a situation. Viridian 7 is gone. Not destroyed, gone, and whatever took it is still out there." The Council's desperation, the Grand Assembly Chamber on Nexus Prime had been constructed to inspire awe and unity. Its vaulted ceiling rose 300 meters overhead, decorated with holographic representations of every member species' home world. The circular floor could accommodate 5,000 delegates, each with their own translation system and environmental controls. Today, the chamber felt more like a tomb than a symbol of galactic cooperation. Chancellor Theron stood at the central podium, his crystalline form refracting the harsh emergency lighting into rainbow patterns across the worried faces of the assembled delegates. He had held this position for 20 years, guiding the Galactic Assembly through trade disputes, territorial negotiations, and minor conflicts. Nothing in his long career had prepared him for this moment. "The situation is worse than we initially reported," Theron began, his voice amplified through the chamber's acoustics. "In the 42 days since the Viridian 7 incident, we have lost contact with 63 additional colonies, 17 mining operations, and 4 major industrial centers. The total population loss is estimated at 400 million beings." The chamber erupted in shocked murmurs and frightened chirps from delegates whose species expressed distress through sound. Theron waited for the noise to subside before continuing. "We have designated these attackers as the Krinthax, based on linguistic patterns detected in their rare communications. What we know about them is limited and disturbing. They are a biomechanical species that appears to consume technology and organic matter to fuel their expansion. They adapt with terrifying speed, learning from each engagement and modifying their tactics accordingly." Admiral Vax, the Zenthoran military commander, activated his holographic display at his delegation's platform. The image showed a 3-dimensional map of the affected sectors, red markers indicating lost colonies spreading like a disease from the outer rim toward the core systems. "Chancellor, with respect, we need to discuss military options immediately." Vax's deep voice rumbled through the chamber. "Every moment we delay, they grow stronger. My fleet is prepared to engage, but we need authorization and support from member species." Councillor Mira of the Ashanti Coalition stood, her silver robes flowing as she addressed the assembly. "Admiral Vax has already engaged these Krinthax on 3 separate occasions. Perhaps he should share the results of those encounters before we commit to a military solution." Vax's facial plates darkened with embarrassment, but he maintained his composure. "We have engaged the Krinthax at Threshold Station, the Belgard Nebula, and most recently at the Krios shipyards. In each case, our forces were outmaneuvered and overwhelmed. The Krinthax analyze our formations, identify optimal attack vectors, and execute with perfect precision. They do not retreat. They do not hesitate. They simply adapt and overcome." "What about the Krios shipyards?" asked Delegate Toron of the Manufacturing Guild. "That facility had defensive capabilities equivalent to a military fortress. State-of-the-art shielding, automated defense grids, and a garrison of 10,000 troops." "Gone," Vax said simply. "Consumed in 14 hours. The Krinthax learned to phase through our shields by the 3rd hour of combat. By hour 6, they had decoded our defense grid algorithms. By hour 10, they had turned our own automated weapons against us." The survivors described it as fighting an opponent that evolved in real time, countering every tactic the moment it was deployed. The chamber fell silent. Finally, an elderly delegate from the Preservation Council spoke, her voice thin but clear. "I have reviewed the historical archives. There is precedent for this type of threat. Approximately 3,000 years ago, similar reports emerged from the Galactic Rim, a consuming force that adapted to all resistance. The records from that era are fragmentary, but they indicate that conventional military responses proved ineffective. What stopped them? Chancellor Theron asked. The elderly delegate's expression was grim. The records are unclear on that point. What is clear is that over half of the inhabited galaxy fell silent during that period. When contact was re-established decades later, entire civilizations had vanished. Some historians believe the attackers simply exhausted their food supply and retreated. Others theorize they were defeated by an unknown force that chose not to reveal itself. Councillor Mira pulled up her own data on the main display. I've been conducting my own research. There are scattered references in multiple ancient texts to what they called the Chaos Warriors. Species that fought without logic, without predictable patterns, that somehow disrupted the attacker's ability to adapt. Chaos is not a military strategy, Admiral Vax objected. Warfare requires discipline, coordination, and tactical doctrine. Random actions lead to random results. Unless your opponent's greatest strength is the ability to predict and counter logical tactics, Mira countered. The Krinthax are perfect soldiers because they fight perfectly. They analyze, adapt, and overcome through superior processing of tactical information. But what if there was nothing logical to analyze? Chancellor Theron considered this. Are you suggesting we abandon military doctrine entirely? That would lead to catastrophic casualties from our own disorganization. I'm suggesting we need to find someone who has already proven they can fight effectively without following traditional military doctrine. Mira activated another display, this one showing a small, isolated star system surrounded by quarantine beacons. I'm suggesting we contact the humans. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Delegates shouted over each other in a dozen languages, their translation systems struggling to keep up with the chaos. Admiral Vax's facial plates flushed dark red with anger, while other delegates simply stood in stunned silence. The humans were exiled for good reason. Vax roared over the noise. They are barbarians who fight without honor, who show no respect for the conventions of civilized warfare. The Singapore Protocol disaster proved they cannot be trusted. The Singapore Protocol was 350 years ago, Mira shot back. And the reports from that incident show that humanity defeated a Corellian invasion force 3 times their size, using tactics that no military academy would approve. Yes, there were civilian casualties. Yes, their methods were brutal. But they won against impossible odds. Theron raised his hand for silence, and gradually the chamber quieted. Let us review the facts dispassionately. The humans were quarantined after the Singapore Protocol incident because member species feared their unpredictable nature and willingness to sacrifice for tactical advantage. They have remained isolated in their home system for over 3 centuries. We have no recent intelligence about their current military capabilities or diplomatic stance, which is exactly why we should not involve them, argued Delegate Kethis of the Trade Federation. For all we know, they have become even more dangerous during their isolation. We could be trading one threat for another, or we could gain the only allies who have ever successfully fought using the kind of unpredictable tactics that might work against the Krinthax, Mira insisted. I've reviewed every historical engagement where humans participated. They don't fight like any other species. They combine elements that shouldn't work together. They take risks that appear suicidal but somehow succeed. They create situations where standard tactical analysis becomes meaningless. Admiral Vax activated a classified file on his personal display. I will share something that few outside the military command are aware of. 3 weeks ago, we sent an automated probe into the Sol system to assess current human capabilities. The probe was detected within seconds of crossing their quarantine boundary and destroyed by weapons we could not identify or track. The energy signatures were unlike anything in our databases. That could indicate advancement or aggression. Noted Chancellor Theron, it indicates they have not grown soft during their isolation, Mira said, which is exactly what we need. Admiral, you said yourself that the Krinthax adapt to logical military responses. What happens when they face an opponent who doesn't respond logically? The debate continued for hours, but the reality was inescapable. The Galactic Assembly was losing the war against the Krinthax. Every engagement taught the enemy more about galactic military doctrine. Every defeat made the next battle harder to win. The mathematical projections showed that at the current rate of loss, the Krinthax would reach the core systems within 6 months. Finally, Chancellor Theron called for a vote. The motion was simple: authorize contact with humanity and request their assistance against the Krinthax threat. The vote was not unanimous. Many delegates abstained, unable to reconcile their fear of the Krinthax with their historical fear of humanity. But the motion passed. "Very well," Theron announced. "I will personally lead the diplomatic mission to Earth. May the ancient lights guide us, because we are about to wake a force that we spent centuries trying to contain." The Forgotten Warriors archivist Ilara descended deeper into the historical archives beneath Nexus Prime, her bioluminescent markings providing the only light in passages that hadn't been accessed in over a century. The main library systems contained data from the past 1,000 years, readily searchable and frequently referenced. But the older records, the truly ancient information from before the modern galactic assembly, existed only in physical form, stored in crystalline data matrices that had to be manually accessed. She was searching for the truth about humanity, beyond the sanitized versions taught in schools and repeated in political speeches. Chancellor Theron had personally requested this research, understanding that any diplomatic mission to Earth needed to be based on complete information. Not convenient myths. The first data matrix she found was labeled "The Singapore Protocol Investigation Classified." Ilara inserted it into her portable reader and began absorbing the contents. What she read made her primary heart skip a beat. 353 years ago, the colony world of Singapore Nova had been attacked by Corellian raiders, a species known for their advanced weapons and ruthless tactics. The Corellians had brought a fleet of 40 warships against the human colony, which possessed only basic defensive capabilities. Standard galactic response would have been to evacuate, preserve lives, and appeal to the Galactic Defense Force for intervention. The humans did not evacuate. Instead, they fought with a ferocity that shocked even the battle-hardened Corellians. The colony's 8 defensive ships, outmatched and outgunned, did not attempt to engage in conventional combat. They used the planet's gravity well to execute impossible maneuvers, crashed damaged ships directly into enemy vessels, and employed their industrial facilities to create improvised weapons that violated multiple conventions of civilized warfare. One human captain, identified only as Rodriguez, deliberately set his ship on a collision course with the Corellian flagship. When ordered to surrender, his response had been recorded. Surrender is not in the manual. His ship, loaded with the colony's entire supply of fusion cores, detonated inside the enemy flagship's shields, destroying both vessels and creating a chain reaction that damaged half the Corellian fleet. The Corellians retreated after losing 23 ships, something they had never done in their 200-year history of raiding. But the victory came at a terrible cost. The human tactics had caused massive collateral damage. Debris from the destroyed ships had rained down on Singapore Nova. 40,000 colonists died from the fighting. Another 60,000 died from the aftermath, as the damaged planetary infrastructure failed. The Galactic Assembly had been horrified. Yes, the humans had won. Yes, they had defeated a superior force. But the cost, both to themselves and to the principles of minimizing civilian casualties, was deemed unacceptable. The investigation concluded that humanity's willingness to sacrifice civilians for military advantage, their disregard for conventional rules of engagement, and their unpredictable tactical decisions made them too dangerous to integrate into galactic civilization. The quarantine was imposed not as punishment, but as a protective measure. The galaxy was protecting itself from humanity's chaos. Ilara continued deeper into the archives, finding more matrices, more records. She discovered documentation of humanity's earlier conflicts. Before Singapore Nova, the species had barely achieved faster-than-light travel when they first encountered the Varanthi swarm in the Outer Rim territories. The Varanthi were insectoid raiders who attacked in overwhelming numbers, using their numerical superiority to drown enemies in bodies. They had terrorized Rim colonies for decades, and no military force had found an effective counter to their swarm tactics. The humans had encountered the Varanthi while exploring beyond their home system. The first contact went poorly. A human science vessel was destroyed, all hands lost. The Varanthi assumed humanity would respond like other species, pulling back and ceding territory. Instead, humanity declared war. What followed was documented in a military analysis, written by a Galactic Defense Force observer. The humans did not attempt to match the Varanthi numbers. They did not build larger fleets or develop superior weapons. Instead, they studied their enemy and identified a weakness. The Varanthi relied on pheromone-based communication for swarm coordination. Human chemical engineers developed a synthetic pheromone that caused confusion in the Varanthi neural systems. Their military deployed it as a weapon, not by spreading it evenly across battlefields, but by releasing it in concentrated bursts that created false signals and contradictory commands. The result was Varanthi swarms turning on themselves, attacking their own hive ships, and spreading the confusion through their communication network. Within 6 months, the Varanthi swarm had collapsed into infighting and chaos. They retreated to their homeworlds and never raided galactic space again. The tactic was brilliant. It was effective. And it was also considered deeply unsettling by other species. The humans had weaponized their opponent's biology against them, turning the Varanthi's greatest strength into their catastrophic weakness. It showed a willingness to exploit any vulnerability, no matter how unconventional the method. Ilara found more records. Humans negotiating trade agreements with species that had planned to cheat them, only to discover that the humans had anticipated the deception and prepared countermeasures. Humans defending their colonies with tactics that made no logical sense until viewed in retrospect, when the seemingly random actions revealed themselves as parts of elaborate psychological warfare campaigns. One report, written by an alien military analyst named Cortex, summarized humanity's nature in a way that Ilara found both fascinating and frightening. The humans do not fight to win battles. They fight to break their opponent's will to continue fighting. They understand that warfare is not about ships and weapons, but about psychology and adaptation. They will sacrifice pieces to win the game, and they play games that have no rules. In another section of the archives, Ilara discovered something even more intriguing. There were fragments of much older texts, predating the modern galactic assembly by millennia. These ancient documents, barely legible after thousands of years, spoke of a great threat from the void between galaxies. The descriptions matched what the assembly now knew about the Krinthax, biomechanical entities that consumed everything, adapted to all resistance and spread like a plague. One fragment, translated from a long-dead language, caught Ilara's attention. Only the warriors without pattern drove them back. Those who embraced chaos where others sought order. The devourers could not consume what they could not predict. The price of victory was terrible, and when the war ended, the Chaos Warriors were sent away, feared almost as much as the threat they had defeated. The connection was clear. 3,000 years ago, someone had fought the Krinthax using unpredictable, chaotic tactics, someone who prioritized victory over conventional morality, someone who scared other species almost as much as the enemy they defeated. Someone like humanity. Ilara compiled her findings into a comprehensive report and sent it to Chancellor Theron. She included everything: the victories, the controversies, the fear that humanity inspired in other species, and the ancient suggestion that similar warriors had once saved the galaxy. Her final note was simple: if we contact humanity, we must understand what we are inviting back into our midst. They may save us from the Krinthax, but we must also prepare for the possibility that surviving the cure might be almost as challenging as surviving the disease. 3 days later, Chancellor Theron approved the diplomatic mission to Earth. He had read Ilara's report, understood the risks and accepted them, because the alternative was watching the galaxy be consumed by an enemy that could not be defeated through conventional means. The diplomatic vessel Harmony's Voice departed. Nexus Prime carrying Chancellor Theron, Ambassador Krell, who had survived Viridian 7 by being off-world during the attack, Admiral Vax's second-in-command Admiral Soren, and a full security detail. Also aboard was Ilara herself, invited as a historical consultant to help navigate the cultural complexities of first contact with a species the galaxy had deliberately isolated for centuries. As the ship approached the Sol system, Ilara reviewed humanity's last transmission, to the Galactic Assembly, sent 347 years ago. It had been brief and bitter. You exile us for winning your war. So be it. We will remember this. If you ever need us again, the price will be high. The price would indeed be high, Alara thought. But what choice did they have? The Krinthax were coming, and the galaxy needed its Chaos Warriors once more. First contact redux. The Harmony's voice emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Sol system, careful to remain outside the quarantine boundary. Immediately, dozens of targeting sensors locked onto the diplomatic vessel. Warning broadcasts in multiple human languages filled the communication channels. Attention unidentified vessel. You have entered restricted space. Power down your weapon systems and state your intentions, or you will be fired upon. Chancellor Theron activated the pre-prepared response package. This is Chancellor Theron of the Galactic Assembly, aboard the diplomatic vessel Harmony's voice. We come seeking peaceful contact with humanity. We have no hostile intentions and request permission to approach Earth. There was a long pause. Ilara watched the sensor displays showing the Human Defensive Network. It was far more extensive than their records indicated. Weapon platforms, both obvious and hidden, covered every possible approach vector. Energy signatures suggested technologies that were not in the galactic databases. Whatever humanity had been doing during their centuries of isolation, they had not been idle. Maintain current position, the human voice responded. A delegation will arrive shortly to assess your intentions. Any attempt to advance further into the system will be considered an act of war. 4 hours later, a human ship arrived. It was smaller than the Harmony's voice, but Ilara immediately recognized it as a warship, despite its designation as a diplomatic escort. Every line of its design spoke of function over form, of weapons concealed behind innocent-looking hull plating, of engines capable of impossible accelerations. This is Secretary General Elena Vasquez of the Earth Colonial Administration. You have 30 minutes to convince me why we should let you come any closer. Chancellor Theron had prepared for this moment, but actually facing humanity after 3 centuries of silence was more intimidating than he had anticipated. Secretary General, the galaxy faces an existential threat. A force called the Krinthax is consuming colonies and civilizations. They adapt to all conventional military responses. We have lost hundreds of millions of lives. We need help. You need help. Vasquez's voice was cold. How interesting. 350 years ago, we needed help. We were being raided by the Corellians. Instead of protection, you gave us exile. You called us barbaric for winning a war we didn't start. The Singapore Protocol resulted in significant civilian casualties. Admiral Soren interjected. Surely you can understand why? 43 human worlds were raided before Singapore Nova. Vasquez cut him off. 14,000 colonists killed. 2 entire settlements enslaved. We begged for Galactic Defense Force intervention. You sent observers who documented the attacks and did nothing. So we defended ourselves. We won. And you punished us for it. Ilara activated her communication channel. Secretary General, my name is Ilara. I'm a historian. I've spent the last month reviewing all records of human galactic interactions. You're correct. The Assembly failed humanity. The quarantine was imposed because other species feared your effectiveness more than they valued justice. And now you want to use that effectiveness, Vasquez said. How convenient. Yes, Chancellor Theron said simply. We do. I could offer you diplomatic language and promises, but I suspect you would prefer honesty. The galaxy is losing a war. Everything we try fails because our opponent adapts faster than we can innovate. We need warriors who don't fight in predictable patterns. We need humanity. What's in it for us? Another voice joined the conversation, this one belonging to a man who identified himself as General Marcus Webb, Supreme Commander of Earth Defense Forces. We've been isolated for centuries. We've built our own civilization, our own defenses. Why should we risk our people for yours? Because the Krinthax will eventually reach your system, Ilara said. They consume everything. Once they finish with the rest of the galaxy, they will come here. Fighting them alone, even with your impressive defenses, would be extremely difficult. We've faced difficult before, Webb replied. This is different, Ambassador Krell spoke for the first time, his voice still haunted by memories of Viridian 7. I watched them consume my world. They don't just kill, Secretary General. They absorb. Every piece of technology they consume makes them smarter. Every person they incorporate adds to their knowledge. They learn languages, tactics, weaknesses. If they reach Earth after consuming the rest of the galaxy, they will know everything about you. Every strategy you've ever used, every weapon you've ever built, because they will have encountered and absorbed versions of it from other species. There was a long silence on the human channel. Then Vasquez spoke again, her tone slightly softer. "You're asking us to fight your war to prevent it from becoming our war. I'm asking you to fight alongside us as equals," Theron said. "Full reinstatement in the Galactic Assembly, unrestricted travel and trade rights, territory allocation for colony expansion, and reparations for the 3 centuries of enforced isolation." "That's a start," said a new voice, this one belonging to someone identified as Admiral Sarah Chen, commander of the colonial fleet. "But we also want technology transfers, full access to galactic scientific databases, military alliance status with mutual defense obligations, and a formal apology entered into permanent record, acknowledging that the Singapore Protocol quarantine was unjust." Admiral Soren looked ready to object, but Chancellor Theron cut him off. "Agreed, all of it. We'll formalize it in writing, with binding arbitration clauses, but we need your answer now. The Krinthax advance continues while we negotiate." Another pause, then Vasquez said, "You can approach Earth, but you'll be under constant surveillance. And General Webb will have authorization to destroy your ship if you make any threatening moves." "Understood and accepted," Theron replied. The journey to Earth took 3 days at sub-light speeds. Ilara spent the time observing the human system, amazed at what they had accomplished in isolation. Mars had been fully terraformed. Orbital habitats circled every major planet. The asteroid belt had been converted into a vast industrial complex. This was not the isolated, struggling civilization she had expected. This was a species that had thrived despite being cut off from galactic civilization. Earth itself was beautiful, a blue-green jewel that reminded Ilara why so many species evolved to prefer worlds with liquid water. The Harmony's voice was directed to an orbital station above the North American continent, where the Earth Colonial Administration maintained its headquarters. The meeting took place in a conference room with a view of Earth below. The human delegation consisted of Secretary General Vasquez, General Webb, Admiral Chen, and several advisors, including a man introduced as Dr. Kenji Tanaka. Head of the Human Defense Research Initiative, Chancellor Theron, presented the complete intelligence package on the Krinthax. Their biology, their tactics, their rate of advancement, and the projections showing how quickly they would consume the galaxy, if unchecked. General Webb studied the data with intense focus, occasionally asking technical questions that revealed a deep understanding of military strategy. Admiral Chen was more interested in the Krinthax ships themselves, requesting detailed specifications on their capabilities. It was Dr. Tanaka who identified the critical issue. They're learning machines, essentially, biomechanical neural networks that process tactical information and optimize responses in real time. Every engagement makes them smarter. "Exactly," Ilara confirmed, "which is why conventional military doctrine is ineffective. They analyze, adapt, and overcome. So you need us because we don't follow conventional doctrine," Vasquez said. "You need the Chaos Warriors?" Ilara blinked in surprise. "You know that term?" "We've hacked your historical databases for decades," Dr. Tanaka said with a slight smile. "You really thought your quarantine would keep us completely isolated? We've been monitoring galactic civilization, studying your military engagements, learning everything we could. We know about the ancient texts mentioning warriors who fought the devouring threat 3,000 years ago. We know you think we might be similar to those warriors." "Are you?" Theron asked. General Webb stood and walked to the window, looking down at Earth. "Secretary General, I recommend we accept the alliance, but not because of altruism or past grievances. We accept because fighting the Krinthax out there with allies is better than fighting them alone here later." "I agree," Admiral Chen said. "But we go in on our terms. Our ships, our tactics, our rules of engagement. The Galactic Defense Force provides support and intelligence, but human forces operate independently." "That's highly irregular," Admiral Soren protested. "Military coalitions require coordination, unified command structures, which is exactly what the Krinthax expect," Dr. Tanaka interrupted. "They've been defeating your coordinated fleets. They've learned to predict your unified command decisions. You need us to be irregular. That's the entire point. Chancellor Theron looked around the table, seeing the resolve on the human faces. They were not asking for permission. They were setting terms, and he realized that he had no choice but to accept. Very well, he said. Human forces will operate as an independent command with full tactical autonomy. We'll provide intelligence, logistical support, and coordinate with your operations to avoid friendly fire incidents. But you make your own decisions on the battlefield. Then we have an agreement, Vasquez said. She stood and extended her hand in the human gesture of accord. Welcome back to the galaxy, Chancellor. Let's go remind the Krinthax why predators fear chaos. The Price of Pride President James Okoye addressed the emergency joint session of the Earth Colonial Parliament from the Great Hall in Geneva. Representatives from Earth, Mars, Europa, Titan, and the outer colonies filled the chamber, their faces appearing both in person and through holographic projection from across the solar system. The Chancellor's delegation has returned to Nexus Prime, Okoye began. We now face a decision that will define humanity's future. Do we emerge from our isolation to fight alongside species who rejected us? Or do we remain in Sol System and hope the Krinthax threat will somehow resolve itself? Representative Amara Johnson of the Mars colonies stood to be recognized. Mr. President, many of us grew up hearing stories about the injustice of the Singapore Protocol. Our grandparents were exiled for winning a war they didn't start. Why should we help species who abandoned us? Because spite is not a foreign policy, replied Representative Liu Chen from Europa. The Krinthax don't care about our historical grievances. If they consume the galaxy, they will come here. We have to fight eventually. Better to fight now with allies than later alone. General Marcus Webb activated a holographic display showing the human defensive network. I've commanded Earth Defense Forces for 15 years. We have the best defensive network humanity has ever built. Weapons, satellites, planetary shields, drone fleets. But I've reviewed the Krinthax combat data. They adapt. They learn. What works once won't work twice. If they reach Sol System after consuming the rest of the galaxy, they'll arrive knowing every trick we might use. So you recommend we fight? Said Senator David Kimathi from the African Union. I recommend we fight smart, Webb corrected. The Galactic Defense Force has been losing because they fight predictably. Formations, doctrines, standard operating procedures. The Krinthax eat that for breakfast. But we've never been conventional. That's why they exiled us. Admiral Sarah Chen, who had returned with Webb from the Earth Orbital Station, added her perspective. I've seen their ships. The Krinthax vessels are impressive, but they're not invincible. They're optimized for defeating logical opponents. Their entire tactical framework assumes rational decision-making from enemies. That's their weakness. Dr. Kenji Tanaka, joining via hologram from the Defense Research Complex in Tokyo, brought up detailed analysis of Krinthax biology. Their neural network processors, in organic form. They share information across their entire species through quantum-entangled biomechanical nodes. It's incredibly efficient for coordination and learning. But it also means they're vulnerable to chaos injection. If we can introduce unpredictable variables into their decision-making process, we can overwhelm their adaptive capabilities. You're talking about psychological warfare, noted Representative Johnson. I'm talking about making them think too much, Tanaka replied. Their strength is rapid adaptation to threats. But adaptation requires processing time. If we hit them with enough simultaneous, unpredictable threats, we can exceed their processing capacity. It's like a denial-of-service attack on a computer network, but applied to biological intelligence. President Okoye listened to the debate carefully. The arguments for joining the fight were pragmatic and logical, but he also understood the emotional weight of the decision. For 3 centuries, humanity had defined itself in opposition to the galaxy that rejected them. The quarantine had created a cultural identity built on self-reliance and defensive pride. Let me present a different perspective, said elder statesman Harold Washington, one of the oldest living humans at 137 years. I was a child when the quarantine was imposed. I remember the bitterness, the anger, the sense of betrayal. For decades we defined ourselves by what we had lost. But look at what we built instead. He gestured to the holographic displays showing human civilization. We terraformed Mars in 80 years without galactic help. We built fusion drives that exceed anything in their databases. We developed quantum communication networks because we couldn't access theirs. The quarantine didn't break us. It made us stronger. Elder Washington raises a valid point, President Okoye acknowledged. But strength built in isolation only matters if we survive to use it. The question before us is not whether we can help defeat the Krinthax. It's whether we're willing to risk our people for species who once rejected us. Captain Rachel Torres stood from the military section. She was young for her rank, only 35, but she had distinguished herself in multiple actions against pirate incursions and automated defense probe malfunctions. Mr. President, with respect, we're asking the wrong question. It's not about them. It's about who we choose to be. Do we become the bitter, isolated species that lets the galaxy burn? Or do we become the people who step up when needed, regardless of past wrongs? That's easy to say when you're not the one being sent into combat, countered Representative Michael O'Brien from the Titan settlements. We're talking about committing our military forces to a war that isn't ours. It will be ours if we wait, General Webb said firmly. Captain Torres is right. This isn't about forgiveness or reconciliation. It's about tactical reality. We fight now with support or we fight later alone. Those are the only options. President Okoye called for a vote. The debate had lasted 6 hours, with passionate arguments on both sides. But in the end, the decision came down to pragmatism over pride. The motion to join the Galactic Alliance against the Krinthax passed, with 68% approval. Very well, Okoye announced. General Webb, you are authorized to mobilize our military forces. Admiral Chen, begin preparations for fleet deployment. Dr. Tanaka, I want research teams working around the clock on Krinthax countermeasures. And someone contact Captain Torres. I have a special assignment for her. The special assignment turned out to be command of humanity's first reconnaissance mission into Krinthax territory. Captain Torres reported to the Military Command Center, beneath the Geneva complex, where General Webb and Admiral Chen briefed her on the mission parameters. We need intelligence, Webb explained, showing her tactical maps of Krinthax-controlled space. The Galactic Defense Force has data on their attacks, but nothing on their infrastructure, their logistics, their command structures, if they even have such things. That's where you come in. Torres studied the maps. You want me to penetrate enemy territory and gather intelligence on a species that consumes everything it encounters. Sir, that sounds like a suicide mission. It would be for most species, Admiral Chen said, but we're not sending you in a conventional ship. Come with us. They led Torres to a secure hangar bay where she saw something that made her stop in her tracks. The vessel looked nothing like standard human military craft. It was smaller, sleeker, with hull plating that seemed to shimmer and shift in the light. This is the Shadow of Earth, Chen explained. Her stealth reconnaissance vessel equipped with experimental camouflage technology. The hull is coated with metamaterials that can bend sensor frequencies around the ship. To most detection systems, you'll be invisible. Most detection systems, Torres repeated. What about Krinthax systems? Unknown, Dr. Tanaka admitted, joining them in the hangar. We've never tested it against their biomechanical sensors, but our analysis suggests they rely primarily on electromagnetic and gravitational detection. This ship should be able to evade both. Torres walked around the vessel, noting the absence of obvious weapon ports and the unusually smooth hull surface. What's my armament? Limited, Webb said. 6 quantum torpedoes, point defense lasers, and electronic warfare systems. This ship isn't designed for combat. It's designed for infiltration and escape. Your mission is to gather intelligence and return alive. No heroics, no engagement unless absolutely necessary. Who's my crew? Torres asked. Admiral Chen activated a holographic display showing personnel files. Lieutenant Commander David Osei, your second-in-command and systems specialist. He can operate every system on this ship with his eyes closed. Sergeant Maria Rodriguez, combat specialist and boarding operations expert. Lieutenant James Kim, sensor analyst and xenobiology consultant. And Dr. Nina Patel, field researcher specializing in biomechanical systems. Torres reviewed each file carefully. Osei had commanded 3 successful deep space survey missions. Rodriguez was a veteran of the Kuiper Belt conflicts with automated defense drones. Kim had published breakthrough research on exotic sensor technologies. Patel had studied every piece of Krinthax data available and developed preliminary hypotheses about their biology. When do we leave? Torres asked. 48 hours, Webb replied. That gives you time to familiarize yourself with the ship and brief your crew. Captain, I won't lie to you. This mission has a high probability of failure. If the Krinthax detect you, that ship won't survive a direct engagement. Your only advantage is stealth. Torres met his gaze steadily. Sir, you picked me for this mission because I don't give up easily. I'll get your intelligence and bring my crew home alive. 2 days later, the Shadow of Earth departed Sol system with minimal ceremony. There were no speeches, no crowds waving farewell. In the grand tradition of military intelligence operations, the mission was classified, and the ship's departure went unrecorded in public records. The crew spent the first week of faster-than-light travel running constant drills. OC put everyone through emergency procedures until they could execute them in their sleep. Rodriguez trained the crew in combat scenarios, including how to fight in zero gravity and how to survive if the ship was boarded. Kim calibrated the sensor arrays to detect Krinthax biosignatures. Patel studied every scrap of available data, building psychological profiles of an enemy that might not even have psychology as humans understood it. Torres used the time to get to know her crew. During meals in the small galley, she learned that Osei had grown up on Mars, that Rodriguez's grandmother had fought at Singapore Nova, that Kim's parents were scientists who had spent their careers analyzing the quarantine's effects on human technological development, and that Patel had chosen xenobiology specifically to understand the species that had rejected humanity. Why do you think they finally called us back? Kim asked during one dinner conversation. Desperation, Rodriguez said bluntly. Their perfect military forces can't handle an imperfect enemy. That's what makes this interesting, Patel mused. The Krinthax are learning machines, right? They optimize responses based on data. But human behavior isn't optimizable. We're too irrational, too emotional. From a pure information theory perspective, we're noisy data. So we're literally too chaotic for them to process. OC asked. Potentially, Patel replied. Their neural networks are designed to find patterns and exploit them. But human decision-making includes elements that don't follow logical patterns. Intuition, emotion, cultural factors, individual psychology. We're fundamentally unpredictable. Torres listened to her crew theorize about their enemy and felt a surge of confidence. This was a good team. Smart, experienced, and willing to think creatively about the challenge they faced. When they reached the border of Krinthax-controlled space, Torres ordered full stealth protocols. The Shadow of Earth's metamaterial hull activated, bending sensor frequencies around the ship. To any observer, they would appear as a minor gravitational anomaly at best. Entering contested zone, Osei reported. Multiple Krinthax signatures detected. They're everywhere, Captain. Torres studied the tactical display. The Krinthax ships moved through space in perfect formations, their biomechanical hulls pulsing with energy. She counted over 200 vessels in this sector alone. Take us deeper, she ordered. Find me their infrastructure. Supply lines, command nodes, anything that tells us how they operate. For 3 days, the Shadow of Earth ghosted through Krinthax territory. Kim's sensors picked up detailed information on their ship configurations, their movement patterns, and their communication protocols. What they discovered was both fascinating and terrifying. The Krinthax didn't have supply lines in any conventional sense. Their ships were self-sustaining organisms that generated energy from quantum vacuum fluctuations. They didn't need to refuel or resupply. They simply consumed matter, processed it through biomechanical systems, and integrated it into their structure. They're von Neumann machines, Patel explained during an analysis session. Self-replicating systems that consume resources to make copies of themselves. Except they're biological. Every ship we're seeing could potentially spawn new ships given enough raw material. How do we fight something that reproduces every time it consumes a planet? Rodriguez asked. We don't fight the ships, Torres said, studying the data. We fight the intelligence controlling them. Lieutenant Kim, are you picking up any centralized communication patterns? Kim worked his console, filtering through the quantum noise. Yes, Captain. There's a low-frequency carrier wave connecting all the Krinthax vessels. It's like a neural network backbone, allowing them to share information instantaneously. Can you trace it to a source? Working on it. Captain, I'm reading a massive concentration of Krinthax signatures approximately 3 light-years from our current position. The communication signals are strongest there. It could be a command center or coordination hub. Torres made her decision. Set course for those coordinates. Let's see what passes for Krinthax High Command. What they found exceeded their worst fears. The Krinthax hub was a structure the size of a small moon, constructed entirely from consumed technology and organic matter. Thousands of ships orbited it like bees around a hive. The structure itself pulsed with bioelectrical energy, and the quantum communication signals emanating from it were orders of magnitude stronger than anything they'd detected before. "Dear God," Osei whispered. "That thing is processing more data than every computer in Sol system combined." Patel was transfixed by her sensor readings. "It's a distributed intelligence core. The entire structure is one massive neural network. Every Krinthax ship connects to it, shares data with it, receives instructions from it. This is how they coordinate across such vast distances. And if we destroy it?" Torres asked. "Then the Krinthax revert to individual units without central coordination," Patel said. "But Captain, the power readings from that structure suggest it has defenses that would vaporize a fleet. We can't attack it with one stealth ship." "I'm not planning to attack it," Torres said. "I'm planning to understand it. Kim, I want detailed scans of every aspect of that hub. Power distribution, communication protocols, defensive systems, structural vulnerabilities. Everything. For 2 days, the Shadow of Earth maintained position at the edge of the system, gathering intelligence on the Krinthax hub. Kim's sensors collected terabytes of data. Patel analyzed the bioelectrical patterns and began to understand how the hive mind functioned. Rodriguez identified potential weak points in the hub's defensive grid. OC calculated the energy requirements for maintaining such a massive structure. Then their luck ran out. "Captain, we've been detected," Osei reported, his voice tight with alarm. "A Krinthax patrol ship just changed course toward our position." "They see us," Torres didn't hesitate. "Full power to engines. Get us out of here." "Kim, send everything we've collected on a tight beam transmission to the Galactic Defense Force relay station. If we don't make it, at least the intelligence gets through." The Shadow of Earth broke from its hiding position and accelerated hard, its engines pushing the limits of their design. Behind them, the Krinthax patrol ship gave chase, and it was fast. Faster than their intelligence had suggested possible. "They've adapted," Patel said, watching the pursuit on her screen. "They detected our stealth technology and modified their sensors to compensate. They're learning even now." "Rodriguez, prep the quantum torpedoes," Torres ordered. "We may need to fight our way out." "Captain, 3 more Krinthax ships have joined the pursuit," Osei reported. "And they're communicating with the hub. The entire sector is mobilizing to intercept us." Torres made rapid calculations. They couldn't outrun 4 ships, and they definitely couldn't fight them. "Osei, can we make it to the nearest nebula?" "The one showing on navigation is Echo 7. "Yes, but they'll follow us in. That's what I'm counting on." "Kim, how well do Krinthax sensors work in dense particle fields?" Kim checked his data. "They should have difficulty. Their bioelectrical systems are optimized for vacuum. High-density particle environments would interfere with their quantum entanglement communications. Then we use the nebula to break line of sight and disappear," Torres said. "Everyone hold on. This is going to be rough." The Shadow of Earth plunged into the Echo 7 nebula at dangerous speeds. The dense particle clouds immediately interfered with both human and Krinthax sensors. Torres relied on intuition and quick reactions, dodging around areas of higher density while trying to lose their pursuers in the cosmic fog. Behind them, the Krinthax ships entered the nebula in perfect formation, their coordination speaking to their shared intelligence. But the particle interference was affecting them. Torres watched as their pursuit pattern became less efficient, their movements less perfectly synchronized. "They're having trouble communicating with each other," Patel confirmed. "The nebula is disrupting their quantum link to the hub." "Rodriguez, target the lead ship with a quantum torpedo," Torres ordered. "Fire on my mark." The torpedo streaked through the nebula, its exotic matter warhead detonating directly against the Krinthax vessel's hull. The explosion created a cascade of secondary reactions in the particle-dense environment, temporarily blinding all sensors in the area. Torres used the confusion to change course radically, diving deeper into the nebula and activating full stealth protocols. The shadow of Earth became a ghost once more, silent and invisible in the swirling cosmic clouds. For 3 tense hours, they played cat and mouse with the Krinthax ships. Every time the pursuers got close, Torres would execute an unpredictable maneuver. Sudden course changes, brief engine burns, followed by long drifts, even flying backward at one point. Nothing that a Krinthax tactical computer could predict or anticipate. Finally, the enemy ships gave up the search and withdrew from the nebula. Torres waited another 6 hours before ordering the ship to emerge on the far side of the particle cloud. "Did the data transmission get through?" she asked Kim. "Confirmed, Captain." The relay station acknowledged receipt of our intelligence package. "Command knows everything we learned." Torres allowed herself a moment of relief. "Set course for the rendezvous coordinates. Let's go home and tell them how to kill that hub. Comment for next part."